Old Swanner here. Today I'm going to present an analysis that I entitle Chord Changes, the Missing Link. In my opinion, this is the correct way to change chords and has ramifications for a ton of other stuff that you're dealing with as well. From my experience, most people at the very least don't understand this fully and in many cases have no idea. I've never seen this stuff really presented despite looking for this sort of information for years and years. What I'm going to attempt to do is offer you a systematic breakdown of chord changes, and hopefully I'll present that in a way that makes good sense to you and you can see how that affects the things that you're currently working on. I've surprised a few students over the years by asking them to let me watch them change from a D chord to a D chord. That normally makes no sense to them until I explain, so let me explain to you. What I mean by changing from a chord to itself, in this case a D chord, is on the down we will strum the chord, but on the up we lift the chord completely off the strings, leaving just open strings as we strum up. And then we repeat. Now the speed you can do this perfectly at is something you can measure, either using a metronome or, as I have here, a computerized backing track. I'll put a D chord backing on at 40 beats per minute and I'm playing eighth notes against it. We then push the speed and see how fast they can do it and still keep it perfect. This is 90. Moving up, let's go 150. And the fastest this backing will run at, 220. We could go faster by dropping the tempo and moving into 16th notes, but I think you get the idea from what we've seen there. We then write down the student's top speed, and if they can in the future beat that top speed, then they've improved at a D chord. This applies to any chord you can think of, not just a D. You can do it on Gs, you can do it on your jazz chords, you can do it absolutely anything you like. And it even has implications in other areas to this sort of examination. So that's how good we are at one chord. What we need, of course, is to be able to get between chords, so let's apply the same idea to looking at how good we are at getting between two chords. I'll use G and D. Now this is comprised of, as we saw, D to itself and G to itself. If one of those is weaker than the other, that will be the limiting factor in how quickly you can get between a G and a D. But mechanically, it's really the same as we just did on the D, but this time we alternate chords. So I would have a G, open strings on the up, and then the D, open strings on the up. G, change, D, change, G, change, D, change, G, change, D, change. And of course, likewise, we can measure the top speed. You can do that perfectly at, and it says that's how good you are at changing from a G to a D. Okay, so the trick, or the skill with this, is that all the calculation, the rearranging of the fingers, is done on the up. There's problems if we lift from a G and end up with something that doesn't look like a D, because you now have to do the work on the down, and that's where people run into trouble. The skill is to get better at changing the shape mid-air as you move to the next chord. So I've got G. By the time I've got to the top of my strum, I will have a D chord formed above the strings. Now this is what I've trained in by practicing the D to itself. When I lift the D off and hold the shape, that's what I'm aiming to make when I come from a G chord or any other chord into the D. So I've got G, change, all the work's done, and all that happens on the down is just like we did in the D to itself. Same going back from the D to the G. I'll form the G mid-air, and the better I can form that shape on the up, the easier it is to just drop it on And if people aren't doing this, they come up with all sorts of clever ways which involve a lot more movements, a lot less efficient movements as a rule, and that's what limits their speed and, to quite a big extent, the sound they make when they're strumming through songs. If I was to put this into context and do, say, a classic campfire strum and slow this down, let's see where the change happens. Okay, so this time I'll change 2 and 3 and 4, change D, 2 and 3 and 4, change G, 2 and 3 and 4, up, down, 2 and 3 and 4, up, down. So something else that comes into play there, you can see that I'm stealing the last half beat of the bar to plug in my chord change exactly as we practiced it in isolation. G change, D, and now I'm ready to strum the D as long as the D is there. But every time the change comes round, lift, drop, lift, drop, lift, drop, or whatever you want to call it, up, down, change G, 2 and 3 and 4, change D. And it doesn't matter what song I'm playing, I would just plug the different chords in, and each time I change I would lift the previous chord, make the new chord, here as a C for example, and then on the down, and same going back to the G. So as before, we can measure with your backing track. You would put a metronome on, or a quick changing G to D. You get G change, D change. And once again, if you can improve your top speed, you've improved at a G to D change, or whichever two other chords you plug into this. It really covers all bases with this stuff. You can always find the toughest chord change in any song you're working on, pull it out and plug it into this pattern. Make sure you measure. That's what tells you if you're getting better or not. So one way of making your G's and D's easier is to try some harder chords. You'll exercise some new muscles. If I move across in front so I can get the higher frets into view, one of my favourite patterns is to learn to alternate this chord here, which is an A major ninth. I'm playing on the inside 4 strings. I've got fret 12 of the A string, 11 of the D, 13 of the G, and 12 of the B string. The outside strings are muted. Now, if you try that chord and you've never tried it before, you'll find it's pretty tough. And it gets a whole lot tougher if we try and apply the same idea that we just used on the G's and the D's. And initially, let's just look at changing this to itself. So I'm going to strum down all 6 strings. That means I'm checking that the muting's good on the outside strings. But on the up, as before, I'm going to lift the whole chord off and then try and land it again. And of course the skill is to just hold that shape. If you've never tried this shape before, my guess is you're probably losing the 4th finger. It wants to come over here every time you lift off. When you can get to the stage where you can keep the 4th finger in position, you will obviously have improved, and you can prove that by the fact that your speed, or what I call your benchmark, has gone up. It may be the case you cannot do that at all, however slow you go to begin with, in which case I recommend writing, well, I normally put 3 X's in. 3 X's in the box say I cannot do this, and then when you get to the stage where you can do it, whatever speed, however slow that is, you've improved. And for the rest of your life, I guess you could keep improving at that in theory. I certainly remember I had major problems with that because of the 4th finger when I began. And most people, with the odd exception, seem to have similar issues. It's always the 4th finger loses its shape, making it tough to get the chord back down. Now I like to twin this. That's my A. it's a jazzy A, but it'll work over just an A backing. And if we alternate it with an E chord, but rather than a plain E chord, we will use this one, an E9, without a root in it. We could sound the open E string, but for muting purposes it's good practice. Don't knock the bottom string out, then you can play this at any fret. For now, think of it purely as a physical challenge. Tablature would be X on the outside two strings, and coming from the A string I've got fret 11, first finger, fret 12 with the third finger on the D string, fret 11 with finger 2 on the G string, and fret 12 with the fourth finger on the B string. So with the muting, this should be a fair bit easier than the A major ninth we just saw, because the fourth finger's in a more natural position for most people. But nonetheless, we could measure it. And as I suggested for the D and the G chord, the speed you could get between the two is likely in the ballpark of the speed you can do either of them at. But if one of them is weaker than the other, that would limit the top speed you could get between them at. So if we plug this pair of chords into the same idea, we would get this. A, change, E. And I like this one because it's tough. All the fingers seem to be moving in different directions. If it seems impossible for now, the key to it is number one, getting better at the A major ninth to itself, and then the E9 to itself as well. Let's say you could do both of these at 30 to themselves. I would guess you could get between the two at 20. But if you can't get the A to itself or the E to itself, you've got zero chance of getting between the two, of course. When looking for problems in there, I mean, initially there'll be some fairly obvious problems, but to fine-tune this, it may pay big benefits to look at the individual fingers. For example, my second finger while I'm running that pattern would be doing this. My fourth finger is moving from here in the A major 9 to there in the E9, so it should look like, and hopefully when I'm doing the full two chords, you can see that that's what's happening. It gives you clues as to where the wasted movements are, where you need to build some strength, independence, all the stuff that helps everything you do on guitar. And if you're working on these tougher chords, although it'll be very, very slow and unwieldy, you should find there's big knock-on effects and benefits for the simpler chords you're working on as well.